The night I realized my only son was trying to murder me, my hands did not shake. I want you to understand that because I have since asked myself why. A man of 68, standing in his own kitchen, watching his boy drop something into a cup of chamomile tea, while his daughter-in-law waited in the doorway to see whether the old man would drink. And my hands stayed completely still. Maybe the body already knows what the heart refuses to accept. Maybe after enough small betrayals accumulate, the final one arrives, not as a shock, but as a confirmation. Or maybe I simply had no room left for fear. Because by then, I had already seen enough. My son's name is Derek. His wife is Nadine. And I am Walter Hennessy, a 70-year-old retired real estate broker from Central Ohio who spent 41 years selling land and buildings to people who needed a place to put their lives. I never imagined my life would end up as evidence in a criminal trial. But before I tell you everything, please subscribe. Stories like this one exist to remind us that truth is patient, and justice sometimes arrives slowly. But it always arrives. Derek was standing at my kitchen counter with his back to me, filling the kettle. The house smelled like sage and onions and the Thanksgiving dressing his mother used to make every year in that same kitchen. It was the third week of November, 3 days before the holiday, and the afternoon light was doing what November light does in Ohio, going thin and gray before 4 o'clock, making the kitchen feel smaller than it actually was. I had come downstairs without making much noise, a habit I had developed in recent weeks. Not out of strategy at first, but because I had learned that I heard more when Derek and Nadine did not know I was nearby. So I was at the bottom of the stairs when I saw it. Derek's coat was hanging on the chair by the kitchen door. His right hand reached into the pocket. A small brown bottle came out. No label. The kind you might find at a health food store or a farming supply shop. His thumb worked the cap. I counted 3 drops falling into the cup on the left. Then the bottle went back into the pocket. Then he turned around with a smile that had not changed since he was 4 years old and handed me the cup like a man doing a kind thing for his aging father. I looked at the cup. Then I looked at him. And then I did what I had been practicing for 3 weeks. I became the harmless old man he believed I was. I sat down at the kitchen table. I thanked him. I held the cup between both hands like the warmth of it was the best part of my day. Nadine appeared in the doorway and said something about the Thanksgiving tablecloth. Something ordinary. Something ordinary. Something ordinary. Something ordinary. Something ordinary. The kind of thing a woman says when she is covering a silence that would otherwise be too loud. My son sat across from me. He lifted his own cup. What I need you to understand is that Derek had no idea I had already replaced the liquid in that little brown bottle the same morning, when I found it in his coat pocket before breakfast. I held it for nearly a minute before I carried it to the sink. I smelled it. Something faintly bitter. I poured it into a container I had ready. Then I rinsed the bottle and refilled it with water and 1 drop of soy sauce. Same color. Same weight. Same small bottle placed back in his pocket before he came downstairs. So when he dropped 3 doses into my cup, he dropped colored water. But I still did not drink it. I raised the cup to my lips. I let warm steam touch my face. I tilted it just enough to look convincing. Then I let the liquid rest against my closed lips while I pretended to swallow. The tea ran back into the cup when I lowered it. I touched the corner of my mouth with a napkin and let the rest drain into the cloth while Derek watched. He watched my throat, so I made myself swallow air. And my son smiled. That smile was the thing that finally broke something in me. Not anger. Not grief exactly. Something quieter than both. The understanding that the person who hurt you worst was not a stranger. Never a stranger. It was always someone who once made you believe you could not love anyone more. Let me take you back to where this actually started. Because it did not start with a brown bottle. It started the way most catastrophes start. Slowly. Gently. Wearing the face of something reasonable. My wife Eleanor died 22 months before that November. Pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed in April and gone by August. Those 4 months were the most concentrated grief I have ever experienced. And I say concentrated because grief does not spread itself out evenly the way people tell you it will. It pools in certain moments. Tuesday mornings, the sound of the kettle. The particular way light fell through the kitchen window onto the place where she liked to sit. Eleanor was the one who saw people clearly. I was the one who saw potential. Those two things work beautifully together in a marriage. They work very badly in grief. Because when the person who balanced you is gone, you are left with only your own instincts. And my instinct, when my son arrived at the funeral and held me in the parking lot while I wept, was to trust him completely. That was my first mistake. The second was letting him explain away the months that followed. Derek called every Sunday that first year. I will give him that honestly, because I do not want to paint him as a villain who sprang fully formed from thin air. He asked whether I was eating. He asked whether the gutters needed cleaning. He asked whether the old furnace was holding up. For a while, I thought Eleanor's death had softened him, the way loss sometimes does to people, sanding down the edges that life and ambition leave behind. But the calls began to change around month 7. Not dramatically. Gradually, his wife started joining the conversations, Nadine's voice in the background, asking sensible questions. Whether I had updated my medical paperwork, whether the house had too many stairs for a man my age, whether I had thought about downsizing. Just to simplify things. Walter. Just to lighten the load. That word carried more weight than it appeared to. I did not act on my discomfort. Eleanor would have. She would have named it directly and without embarrassment. The way she named everything. She once told a contractor who had overcharged us that his invoice was creative fiction. And she had said it with such calm certainty that the man had actually apologized. I smiled and said things seemed fine. Then one Saturday morning in July, 11 months after Eleanor died, a rented U-Haul pulled into my driveway. Derek and Nadine stood on my porch with the careful, apologetic expressions of people who have already made the decision they are pretending to ask about. Their house in Powell had gone to foreclosure. Failed investment. Credit cards. Derek's business partnership had dissolved badly. They needed a few weeks, he said, just until they found their footing. His wife's hand rested on my arm. Her smile was warm and precise. We're so lucky to have you, she said. 4 months later, they were still in the guest room. And by then, the house had stopped feeling like mine. It happened in stages. The way most occupations happen. A few boxes in the hallway became furniture and storage, became her candles on Eleanor's dresser. I had kept that dresser exactly as Eleanor left it. Her reading glasses folded on the surface. A small jar of the hand cream she used every night. 3 paperback novels she had never finished. I had not moved any of it. Because a man in grief learns quickly which rooms he can enter and which rooms he needs to leave alone. Nadine moved the hand cream to make room for a diffuser. I did not say anything. I told myself it was grief, making me rigid. I told myself Eleanor would have wanted the house to feel alive. I told myself a lot of comfortable things while my daughter-in-law rearranged the pantry, moved Eleanor's recipe cards into a drawer, and started referring to the master bedroom as the room that would be more practical once I was emotionally ready to let go. Emotionally ready to let go. She said it in the same soft voice she used for all the hardest things she said to me. The voice that sounded like concern and smelled like strategy. Then my health began to decline. Looking back now, the timing was so clean it almost feels embarrassing that I did not see it sooner. My son began driving me to a cardiologist in Springfield about 2 months after they moved in. I had mentioned feeling dizzy some mornings, heaviness in my legs, a fluttering in my chest that I had chalked up to grief and age and too much coffee. He found a doctor quickly. Too quickly. A clinic I had never heard of. In a building that looked like it used to be something else. The doctor seemed competent enough to a man who was not looking carefully. He prescribed medication. Derek picked it up himself. Every morning. He brought my pills to the kitchen table with breakfast. A glass of water. A kindvort. And then he stood beside my chair while I took them. He stood there and he waited, and he watched my throat. At the time, I told myself it was attentiveness, that this was my son taking care of me, the way you hope your children will when you are old and alone and frightened in ways you will not fully admit. I wanted it to be love. But a man who spent 41 years reading contracts knows when something does not add up. The receipt changed everything. It was a Thursday morning in October, roughly 6 weeks after the pills began. The sink in my bathroom was clogged. So I went to the guest bathroom to wash up. I dropped one of my undershirts into their laundry hamper by accident. And when I reached in to retrieve it, my fingers found a paper folded on top of a damp towel. Springfield Discount Pharmacy. Patient name, Walter Hennessy. Medication, dioxin. 90 tablets. I stood there for what felt like a very long time. I had never been to Springfield Discount Pharmacy. I had never spoken to anyone there. And I had no memory of anyone prescribing me anything called dioxin. I folded the receipt and put it in my shirt pocket. I went back to my bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and spent several minutes building explanations. A billing mix-up. Wrong patient information in the system. The doctor sending a prescription to the nearest available pharmacy without telling me. A father's heart is generous with excuses. It has to be. Because the alternative requires admitting something so dark and irreversible that the mind will do almost anything to avoid looking directly at it. But I had spent 4 decades reading documents. That night, after Derek and Nadine went upstairs, I opened my laptop and searched the medication. The list of symptoms appeared one by one. Fatigue, dizziness, heart palpitation, weakness in the legs, confusion. I read the list 3 times. Then I read it again. Slowly. Because every item on it sounded like my own body over the past 6 weeks. Testifying against someone I did not want to accuse. I sat at that kitchen table for an hour before I moved. Then I walked to the bathroom. Locked the door. Gripped the sink with both hands. And looked at myself in the mirror. And I said it out loud. My son is poisoning me. The next morning, I did not confront him. People who have not been in that position sometimes struggle to understand why. Why stay quiet? Why sit across from someone at breakfast and smile and say good morning while they hand you a pill they believe is going to kill you? I stayed quiet because I was still his father. Because confronting him in that kitchen would have given him time to destroy evidence. Change stories. Disappear. Because anger without proof is just noise. Because the only advantage I had was that they believed I was a confused, declining old man who trusted his only child completely. And I was going to use that advantage until there was nothing left to use. When Derek brought my breakfast tray that morning, I played my part. Toast. Scrambled eggs. A glass of water. 1 small white pill resting beside the plate. Doctor said not to miss these. He told me. I know. I said, you take such good care of me. I placed the pill in my mouth. I lifted the water. I swallowed just enough for him to see my throat move. But the pill stayed tucked beneath my tongue, pressed flat against the soft tissue, dissolving slowly while I smiled at my son. He watched. He waited. When he saw what he believed was a swallow, he nodded. Good, he said. You'll feel better soon. After he left the room, I went to the bathroom and spit the pill into a tissue. I wrapped it carefully, sealed it in a small plastic bag, and hid it in the back of my sock drawer. I did the same thing every morning for 14 days. 14 mornings. 14 pills. 14 times my son stood over his father and waited for death to do the job he was paying for. On the 15th morning, I drove to Columbus alone. I told Derek I wanted to clear my head. Maybe stop at the hardware store. He offered to drive me. Of course. With that careful, attentive energy he had developed since the pills began. I thanked him. Patted his shoulder. I told him an old man needed 1 or 2 errands. He could manage himself. He let me go. But I saw the calculation in his eyes as I backed out of the driveway. The lab was in a plain brick building in Columbus, sandwiched between a dental office and a tax preparer. Nothing dramatic about it. I walked in, told the receptionist I suspected an elderly relative had been given incorrect medication, filled out a form, paid in cash, and left 2 pills from my sealed bag. I drove home and waited. The results came 48 hours later. Dioxin. Not the blood pressure medication printed on the label. Not a mix-up. Not a mistake. A cardiac medication administered in a dosage high enough to produce exactly the symptoms I had been experiencing. Enough to make a healthy man's heart appear to be failing. Enough to explain why Walter Hennessy had been getting steadily worse despite his son's attentive care. I read the lab report in my bathroom with the door locked. Then I vomited into the sink. That evening, I went to see Jim Carter. Jim and I had known each other for more than 50 years. We grew up together in Urbana, served together briefly, then built separate lives within 30 miles of where we started. He became a lawyer. I sold commercial real estate. We had drifted after Eleanor got sick. The way old friends sometimes drift when grief sits between them, and neither man knows quite what to do with it. But when he opened his front door and saw my face, he did not ask polite questions. He said, "Walt, come inside." We sat on his back porch in the November cold. I handed him the lab report and the pharmacy receipt. I told him about the pills, the cardiologist in Springfield, the little brown bottle. The 14 mornings my son had stood over me with patience that now looked very different in the light of what I knew. Jim listened without moving. When I finished, he laid everything flat on the table and covered it with one hand. "We can go to the police today," he said. "I know. But you don't want to." "Not yet." He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward. "What else do you need to know?" "Everything," I said. "Before I lose my son forever, I need to know exactly who he became and how far it went." Jim gave me 3 weeks. He told me to write down everything, every conversation, every pill, every strange question about my will or my insurance or my house. He told me to photograph anything I could photograph and throw away nothing. And then he said something I have thought about many times since. "Walt, one day he is going to look at you with that little boy face, and you will want to ask him why. You cannot do that. Not yet. Promise me." I promised. So I went home and became harmless. I moved slower on the stairs. I asked people to repeat themselves in conversation, then pretended to still be confused. I let my son help me into chairs I did not need help sitting in. I let Nadine speak to me in the simplified, patient voice she had adopted somewhere along the way. The voice that said the old man is going. The house will be ours soon enough. And every night, after they went upstairs, I opened my father's old leather notebook and wrote down what they had said, what they had done, what they had not done, and the exact shape of the plan forming around me. The insurance papers were in the guest room nightstand. I found them on a Tuesday afternoon while Derek and Nadine were at the movies. A small detail. A purchased leisure activity that felt strange for 2 people who claimed to have no money. But that was a smaller contradiction I had stopped counting. I waited until the car left the driveway. Then I waited another full minute at the front window, watching the street. Before I went upstairs, the guest room smelled like Nadine's perfume and the expensive lotion she had somehow continued buying. Clothes spilled from open suitcases. Credit card statements sat half buried under a magazine on the floor. On the nightstand, under a paperback novel she had turned face down 100 pages in and never returned to, I found a large envelope. My name was on the first page. Walter Hennessy. Life insurance policy. Face value $750,000. Primary beneficiaries, Derek Hennessy and Nadine Hennessy. Jointly, I turned to the signature page. My signature was there. It was not my signature. I have signed my name hundreds of thousands of times across 41 years of real estate transactions. A man who signs that many documents develops a near-perfect memory of his own handwriting. The signature on that page was close. Careful. Someone had practiced it, but the second loop of the W was slightly too tall. And the way the H compressed at the bottom was wrong. They had forged my name on a life insurance policy worth $750,000. Behind it was a durable power of attorney form, also signed in my forged name. I photographed every page. Slowly. Clearly. Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it, tucked the paperback on top, and went downstairs. When they came home an hour later, I asked if the movie was good. The Sarasota emails came next. People who are planning a crime think they are careful because they delete messages. They do not consider that a phone left charging on a counter is still a window, and that a patient man eventually stands near enough to look through it. One evening, my son left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went upstairs to shower. Nadine was behind the closed guest room door talking in that low, clipped voice she used when she believed I was already asleep or already too far gone to notice. I stood beside the counter for almost 30 seconds. Then I picked up his phone. The screen was still unlocked. There were emails from a real estate agent in Sarasota, Florida. Photographs of a waterfront condominium. Numbers circled in notes. HOA fees. Closing cost estimates. Projected move-in timelines. One message in my son's own words said they were expecting a significant family windfall before Christmas. Possibly earlier, depending on how quickly the situation developed. The situation. I was the situation. My death had been assigned a real estate timeline and a closing date. I photographed the emails and replaced the phone before the shower upstairs shut off. Then I found the doctor. Jim helped me run the records through public databases. The clinic in Springfield had not always been a clinic. The doctor was licensed but on probation. Cash-only appointments. Histories of questionable prescriptions. The kind of physician who wore a white coat to meetings because it made people forget to verify his credentials. Then Jim found the connection that made everything else lock into place. Nadine had a brother. A conviction in Marion County. Fraud. 18 months served. He knew the doctor through a mutual contact. My son had paid cash for prescriptions written in my name. Each one designed to build the same quiet story. Walter Hennessy was declining. Walter Hennessy had heart problems. Walter Hennessy was fragile and confused, and fading in exactly the way old men faded when they were simply too old for the world to keep. Insurance first. Forged power of attorney. Corrupt physician. Poisoned pills. Sarasota condo. By Thanksgiving, I was supposed to be dead. By Christmas, they were supposed to be 800 miles away in a waterfront unit they had paid for with my burial. Jim spread the whole timeline across his desk on the last day of my 3 weeks. Tomorrow morning, he said, we go to the sheriff. Yes, I said. And tonight? Tonight? I told him. I go home and wait for the last move they have left. I found the bottle in his coat pocket the morning of the day with the tea. My son had gone out to the back porch to take a phone call, and his coat was hanging on the chair by the kitchen door. I moved without conscious decision, took the bottle, carried it to the sink, smelled it. Something faintly bitter at the back of the throat. I poured it into a container, sealed it, and set it beside my other evidence. Then I went down to the basement and found one of Eleanor's old amber tincture bottles from the years she made herbal remedies. Same size. Same shape. Same dark color through the glass. I rinsed it clean. Filled it with water. Added 1 drop of soy sauce. And sealed it. I put it back in my son's coat pocket before he came inside. That afternoon, he made chamomile tea. His wife drifted in from the dining room. She arranged the Thanksgiving placemats she had brought from her family. The ones with cranberries stitched in the corners. Such a careful, domestic detail for a table where they intended to watch me die. I watched through the glass panel of the cabinet above the stove. Derek turned his back. Nadine gave one small nod. His hand slipped into his coat. 3 drops of soy sauce and water fell into the cup on the left. He stirred, turned, and placed the cup in front of me with the same gentle concern he had been practicing for months. Here you go. Pop. Sit with me, I said. I want to tell you something about your mother. Nadine moved quickly. Honey, didn't you say you had a work call? He hesitated, then followed her upstairs. The moment the steps were quiet, I switched the cups, not because mine was dangerous anymore, because I wanted my son to experience, even for a moment, the fear of drinking something he did not choose. I wanted him to feel the exact shape of what he had planned for me. When he came back to the table, I raised my cup to Eleanor. He raised his. The first sip hit him before the fear could. His eyes dropped to the cup, then up to me, then back down. His face lost color slowly, the way guilt drains a man from the inside before panic finishes the job. Sweat appeared above his lip. His hand tightened on the handle. Nadine saw it immediately. "What is it?" she said softly. He shook his head. "Nothing." He stood too fast. The chair scraped the kitchen floor with a sharp, ugly sound that made both of us go still. "I think I need to lie down." "Of course," I said. "Get some rest. I'll clean up here." They went upstairs together. His steps were uneven. Hers were controlled and fast. The footsteps of a woman calculating. I stood at the sink and poured both cups down the drain. I rinsed them slowly. Then I walked to the old beige kitchen phone my wife had never let me throw away. And I dialed Jim's office. "It happened tonight," I said. "I'll meet you at the diner," he said. I told Derek I was going to the pharmacy. That was the first lie I had told my son in my life without feeling guilty about it. Jim was already at the corner booth when I arrived. 2 coffees waiting. His leather briefcase on the seat beside him. I had not seen him look that serious since the day he told me Eleanor's diagnosis. He listened, without interrupting, while I walked through everything that had just happened. When I finished, he closed his notepad. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said. "The sheriff's office." "Yes." "Walt." I looked at him. "You kept your promise," he said. We drove to the Champaign County Sheriff's Office the next morning at 8 o'clock sharp. Jim wore an old gray suit that looked like it had survived half the legal troubles in Central Ohio. I wore the dark coat I had worn to Eleanor's funeral. On my lap, I carried a manila folder containing 3 weeks of my life as evidence. The napkin with the tea, sealed in plastic. The pharmacy receipt from Springfield. Photographs of the forged power of attorney. Photographs of the insurance policy. The lab report. The emails about Sarasota. 14 pills in a sealed bag. My handwritten notes from my father's leather notebook. Every entry dated and timed. A young deputy called my name. We sat in a small interview room that smelled like printer ink and old coffee. Jim placed the folder on the table between us and said, "My client needs to report an attempted murder." The deputy looked at me. For a moment, I could not start, because once I said it in that room, my son would stop being my son in the eyes of the law. He would become a suspect, a défendant, a man who tried to kill his father for $750,000 and a waterfront condo he had never worked hard enough to earn. Jim touched my elbow. So I began. I told them everything. The pills, the receipt, the lab, the insurance policy, the forged signature, the Springfield doctor, the emails about Sarasota, the bottle, the tea. The moment I switched the cups, the deputy stopped writing. He looked up. "Sir," he said quietly, "you are a remarkable man." I shook my head. "No," I said. "I am just a father who finally opened his eyes." They arrested Derek and Nadine that same afternoon. I was standing in my living room when the deputies came through the front door with the warrant. The house was strangely bright. November sunlight across the hardwood floor that Eleanor had polished every Friday for 36 years. Derek was in the kitchen making a sandwich. He turned when he heard the voices. For 1 second. He looked annoyed. The way a man looks when something interrupts his afternoon. Then he saw the badges. Nadine appeared at the top of the stairs in a robe. One hand on the railing, eyes going sharp and still as she calculated what was left to calculate. There was nothing left. A deputy read their rights. Another move toward Derek. "Pop," my son said. One word. That name. The one he had used since he was small enough to sit on my shoulders at the county fair and point at the fireworks going up over the river. "Pop. Please," he said as they took his wrists. "I can explain." I looked at my only child for a long moment. "No," I said quietly. "You can't." And then they took him out of my house. The trial took 14 months. Jim's son handled my representation. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s who had spent years on elder abuse cases. On the first day, she told me she had rarely seen evidence this complete. She meant it as a compliment. It did not feel like one. Derek took a plea. So did Nadine. The evidence was simply too complete to argue around. The forged power of attorney, the insurance policy, the lab results, the emails, the physician's records, the pharmacy receipt, the pills in the bag, my own carefully dated notes from my father's notebook. At sentencing, I sat in the front row in the same dark suit I had worn to Eleanor's funeral. Derek received 18 years. Nadine received 22. The physician in Springfield lost his license and received 6. Her brother was separately charged for arranging the connection. When the judge read the sentences, Derek turned and looked back at me once. For a moment, I did not see a criminal. I saw a boy of 8, sitting behind my desk on a Saturday morning with a green crayon in his hand, pretending to sign million-dollar contracts while his feet hung nowhere near the floor. Then the moment passed. I did not nod. I did not cry. I let him see only the man he had tried to bury. Then he turned away. I drove home from the courthouse alone. The first snow of the year was falling in thin, uncertain flakes across the windshield. And I drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, because I had nowhere I needed to arrive in any particular hurry. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. The porch light flickered the way it always had. Eleanor's wind chime moved gently by the back steps. The maple leaves gathered against the garage door. Inside, the silence was waiting. I made coffee, because that is what a man does when he does not know what else to do. I sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug and watched snow collect on the window over the sink. I thought about Eleanor. She would have seen it sooner. She always saw storms before I did. She would have noticed the hunger behind Nadine's careful smile, the shame underneath Derek's silence, the way greed had been rearranging the furniture of our family for longer than I had allowed myself to look. Then I thought something harder. Maybe I had seen it too. I just had not wanted to believe it. That night, justice did not feel like victory. It felt like surviving a house fire with no one left to call home. I sold the house the following spring. People told me not to make large decisions while grieving. They were right. And I made the decision anyway. Because every room had become a witness. The kitchen remembered the cups. The guest room remembered the insurance papers. The hallway remembered the sound of handcuffs. Even Eleanor's garden, the one place I thought might stay untouched, had started to feel like a performance of a life I was no longer living. I packed what mattered. Eleanor's recipe cards, my father's watch, the leather notebook, a handful of photographs from the years before money and greed entered our family like smoke under a closed door. The rest I gave away. I bought a smaller house in Yellow Springs. 1 story, 2 bedrooms, a garden out back. No staircase to make me think about weakness. No guest room for people who calculated square footage before they said hello. The quiet followed me there at first, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the kind that holds its breath waiting for the next betrayal. The kind that lets a man sit still and breathe. On Wednesday evenings, I started taking a watercolor class at the community center. I was terrible at it. My trees looked like green smoke and my barns leaned like they had been drinking since noon. But the people in that class were kind. And one widow brought oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper most weeks. We became friends. At 70 years old, friendship is not a small thing. Derek sent 4 letters from prison over the following year. I placed them unopened in a kitchen drawer. Once, on a night when the rain was loud against the window, I took the first envelope out and held it under the kitchen light. His handwriting was still the same crooked handwriting from the birthday cards he used to make me in elementary school. I held it for nearly a full minute. Then I put it back. Forgiveness, I have learned, does not arrive on someone else's timeline. And surviving does not require me to have every answer today. People ask whether I hate him. Not directly. But I can hear the question underneath the polite ones. Do I ever think about visiting? Do I believe he is sorry? Has time changed how I see it? What they want to know is whether a father can stop loving a child after that child tries to kill him. I do not have a clean answer. Because the truth is not clean. Some mornings I remember the man with the bottle. Other mornings I remember the boy who asked me in a church parking lot whether everyone had to die someday. And whether I would die too. Not for a long time. I had told him, "Your old man is made of sturdy stuff." Both versions of him were real. That is the cruelty of it. Betrayal does not erase love. It only makes love unsafe to touch. But I never wanted him dead. Even on the day I switched the cups. Even when I let him believe for one terrifying moment that he had swallowed what he meant for me. I did not want his life. I wanted mine back. That was the only revenge I ever asked for. Not poison. Not a confrontation. Not some dramatic scene where I made him suffer in measure for measure. My revenge was waking up the next morning. And the morning after that, sitting in a small house in Yellow Springs with a cup of coffee while the garden came back to life, one small green thing at a time. Painting crooked trees in a community center classroom while someone across the table laughed at how badly we were both doing at something that required patience. My son tried to turn my life into an inheritance. Instead, I kept living it. And some mornings, that is the most devastating thing I can imagine him knowing. I am 70 years old. I make coffee before sunrise in the same chipped mug Eleanor bought at a county fair 20 years ago. I sit by the window and watch the light change. I take walks. I paint terrible watercolors. I have a friend who brings cookies and never once tried to learn what my house was worth. The silence in my home is not the silence of a man who lost. It is the silence of a man who stayed. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Would you have stayed quiet and gathered proof? The way I did? Or would you have confronted him the moment you saw the bottle? Tell me what you would have done. And if you believe that truth always finds its way back to the surface, please subscribe. We tell stories about betrayal, survival, and the kind of justice that finally lets a person breathe again.